All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Serena Nyote. I'm the Director of Public Affairs here at ASBMB. Our webinar today is going to be all about how to advocate in your state and how to have a successful district meeting. We have two fantastic speakers with us today, Jennifer Zeitzer from FASEB. She runs their public affairs work and will be talking about the political environment, what's happening with the current appropriations, and general tips about science advocacy and policy. And then Kevin Gardner, who is a member of ASBMB's Public Affairs Advisory Committee and a scientist at CUNY, will be talking about how to have a really successful congressional meeting. And he was just with us on Capitol Hill last week, meeting with his elected officials. So we'll hear a little bit about that as well. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jennifer.
Great. Thank you so much, Serena, for inviting me. And I think this is such a timely webinar to have. So really very excited to be able to speak with everybody. So give me 1 second. My computer has this annoying lag when I present on Zoom, which I'm super excited about. Anyway, give me 1 second and I will catch up. And I will switch my screen. Go fast. All right. So what ASBMB asked me to do at this point is to, there we go, kind of set the stage about what's been happening over the last 100 days, but I only have 20 minutes total, so I'm going to do the sort of the super speedy version of that. So I think if you think back and look, it's been a lot, to say it politely, in terms of everything that's been happening right now. And I think one of the challenges for our community is not only how fast things have been happening, but how much has been happening and how it's so different from what we're used to. So these are just some headlines and articles from sort of the first week. And I think many of you are probably having this similar experience, right? Like this has been everything that's been going on, and how do we react to that, and what's the role of advocacy as we move forward. So these are just sort of some of my personal observations in terms of the last 100+ days and what it's meant for our community. So I think to start off with, obviously, we've got a lot of new names and faces in Washington, both in the administration, and on Capitol Hill as well too. So this is the president's cabinet, and now that is almost fully in place. We obviously have one new nomination for the replacement for the UN ambassador in Mike Waltz. But this is the cabinet. Most of these folks have now been on the job for about a month or two, some a little bit longer. So there is still this disruption that is happening because of what we have is really an entirely new government. I think we're all fairly aware that we have just seen an explosion in what we are calling governing by executive order, i.e. the White House setting policy and making decisions, mostly from the lens of the executive branch, only, with no consultation with the second branch of government, with Congress, with very little outreach to Congress as well too. And so this has been very hard to keep, not only keep on top of, but to understand what it means, especially since while all presidents have used executive order to try and get their policies and priorities in front of the American public, none has done it to the extent that President Trump has in terms of the scale and scope of the executive orders. And they're still coming, although they slowed down a little bit lately. Then there is the other big player here, which is the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, which came in very quickly on day one and has caused a lot of disruption. In some respects, DOGE has been pegged as the entity that has caused all of this. And there's been some interesting disconnect between the agencies and the departments and DOGE and what's been happening. And right now, even today, it's not quite clear what's going on with DOGE, right? Mr. Musk, who has had a leadership role to some extent, is now apparently kind of less involved and not there anymore. And many of the agencies have worked with, and are now the Doge folks are gone. So this one is an open-ended question about what's going to happen. That being said, a lot of the change that's happened is already been in place, and created by Doge. So what we're starting to see now is congressional, I would say, concern about the scope and scale of the changes that they made and how quickly they did so. And so it's going to be interesting to see what kind of influence Doge continues to have as we have now that we're past this first 100 days. Congress has also got a lot of change happening there. So I think the outcome of the election is known at this point. The Republicans now control the House and the Senate. In the leadership, there's a new Senate Majority Leader in John Thune from South Dakota. And we also have some new senators who were even newer than what was elected in November. So John Husted replaced J.D. Vance in Ohio, and Ashley Moody is the new senator from Florida. That has basically now the Senate roster is complete with no changes expected, I think, moving forward. So that's been interesting to watch. The 53-47 majority does give Republicans a greater opportunity to enact their agenda, but a lot of what is going to happen moving forward is going to require bipartisan cooperation. The House right now, Mike Johnson and Hakeem Jeffries are the leadership. That's no change from the last Congress. The House is very different from the Senate in that in the House you need a simple majority to pass bills. And right now, while the Republicans do hold that majority, it's not a very big one. Depending on who's in attendance for particular votes, they can lose anywhere from 1 to 3 Republicans and still get bills passed with absolutely no Democratic support. We have 3 vacancies in the House. They are all Democrats, and they're all members of Congress who've recently passed away. So there will be some special elections to replace those. But for now, the Democrats are operating with 3 fewer votes than they had previously. We have seen over the last 100 days a fairly epic battle playing out that, I'll be honest, having been an advocate for over 25 years for NIH funding, never been in a situation where the executive branch has been trying to exert maximum control over federal spending to the detriment of Congress's role, which is interesting because the Constitution makes it pretty clear that Congress holds the power of the purse, i.e., it is Congress that gets to decide how federal dollars are spent and allocated to federal agencies. And they do so sort of in consultation with the White House, i.e., the president has priorities, and the members of his party, try and enact those as much as possible, but with congressional input as well. So this has been a battle that has been going on and will continue, I think, for at least the next 6 months. And part of it is because the new director of the White House Office of Management and Budget, a man named Russ Vought, he believes that the Congressional Budget and Impoundment Control Act of 1974, which is the law that has basically implemented Congress's power of the purse since the 70s, he believes this law is unconstitutional. He has said so in public. He said so during his confirmation hearings for OMB director. And that is really what is at the center of the showdown between the executive branch and the legislative branch over federal spending and the limits of presidential power, and that's still being tested. It's being tested with regard to the spending of fiscal year 2025 funding that was approved back in March through that year-long continuing resolution, and it's about to get even bigger because Congress is now beginning the process of establishing the fiscal year 2026 budget. That is the budget that needs to be approved by September 30th of this year. So this is one to really pay attention to. The appropriators, the chairs of the House and Senate Appropriations Committee, have been pretty firm that they do not believe that the executive branch has the amount of power that the executive branch is now currently claiming. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens next. With regard to FY 2025, in part because those bills were so overdue by the time the new Congress got organized in January, between the inauguration and just the massive amount of change between the transition to the new administration. The appropriators sort of lost the battle to try and do anything purposeful with FY 2025 funding. So we did wind up with a very unfortunate situation with the continuing resolution. But I'm hopeful that that means Congress will absolutely reassert its power to spend money in FY 2026. And the new Secretary of Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., has been questioned extensively about that. He appeared before a hearing this week before the Senate Appropriations Committee. He was before the House Appropriations Committee last week, and he was asked point blank by members of that committee, if we allocate funding for FY 2026, will NIH and HHS spend it the way Congress directed and intended? And he said yes, multiple times. So keep an eye on that one. With regard to NIH, it is absolutely impossible to go over everything that has happened and is happening. So I thought it would be good to kind of try and tell you where things are starting to get back to normal. And I'm going to put normal in air quotes because I'm not sure that normal exists anymore. But a couple of things that I want everybody to understand. First of all, after what was a lengthy communications blackout, as it was described, notices and new requests for information are appearing in the Federal Register, and the Federal Register is alive and well. So that is a good sign moving forward. There was a massive amount of disruption in February and March when study sections and grant reviews meetings were just abruptly canceled. The good news is FASEB has been tracking those every week since February, and almost all the ones that were canceled not only were rescheduled, but we have seen new study sections being announced weekly. So we are hopeful that that means that grant funds will start flowing out the door again. In addition, one of the challenges we have faced is that the ways that NIH used to communicate previously under the previous administration, those have all but disappeared right now, and we are seeing new forms of communication from NIH, albeit very slowly in terms of them coming out. So I do want to make sure everybody is aware of the grants.nih.gov page. That is the new central resource for all information on grants and funding and policies related to grants and funding. So bookmark that if you haven't already, because if you are looking something, you will find it there and probably not anywhere else. And then in other good news, the Institute and Center Advisory Council meetings have resumed. Those also had been impacted by the communications blackout imposed by HHS in the early days of the new administration. The National Institute of General Medical Sciences, their advisory council is actually meeting right now. And so those meetings have been helpful to kind of get some additional insight about what's going on. In terms of what's next, and this is, I'm hopefully setting Dr. Gardner up for his presentation, an especially critical time for the advocacy community. While the last 100 days have been a lot, we do have a ton of work ahead of us, and that is with the fiscal year 2026 budget and appropriations process that is underway right now. And I'll be very candid and say the community has got to turn up the volume on this, particularly since we now have seen the administration's fiscal year 2026 budget request to Congress. We've seen what's called the skinny budget, which is, I think, about a 46-page document with just some overall numbers and discussions about proposed cuts without a lot of the detail needed to understand those cuts. But the big thing to keep in mind is it proposed a 23% reduction in non-defense discretionary funding, which sounds super nerdy, but what you need to understand is that the non-defense discretionary funding is what funds NIH and NSF and all the research agencies. So a 23% reduction in those is pretty significant. And that reduction is compared to the 2025 approved budget, keeping in mind that the 2025 budget was actually flat. So it's 23% below a flat budget. I think everybody's probably hopefully aware that the budget proposed about a 20 billion or 40% cut in NIH funding and a 55% cut for NSF funding. Do I think that those cuts will become a reality? I don't think so, because the reaction from Capitol Hill has not been good. The sheer size of the NIH cut was shocking, I think, to a lot of supporters of biomedical research in Congress, both Republican and Democrat. This would be an unprecedented cut. in the first Trump administration, the president multiple times proposed cutting NIH by about 20%, and those cuts were never enacted by Congress. That being said, we really have to make sure that members of Congress of both parties understand what would happen if there was a 40% cut at NIH. And they need to understand that in very stark detail. So now is a great time to be reaching out, to be emailing, calling, and meeting with your members of Congress and their staff to explain the impact of the cuts. I highly recommend that you make those as local and personal as possible. Talk about the number of jobs lost, either ones already lost or the ones on the chopping block because of the lack of funding. Educate about the amount of funding each member of Congress receives in their state or district from NIH and NSF. FASEB has fact sheets with this, and I can drop a link in the chat later to those. Talk directly about what's happening to early career researchers and postdocs in the next generation in as much personal detail as possible, i.e. Institutions, closing down graduate school acceptances for the fall, individuals who have lost places in PhD programs because of lack of funding. And also equally as important, what happens to access to life-saving treatments and care if NIH doesn't, if NIH is cut by 40%. So now is the time to really start that conversation. In terms of why it's important to engage with your elected officials, I will acknowledge the sort of elephant in the room right now, which is if you've been paying attention, and it kind of seems like Congress has been on an extended vacation since January. What have they done? Have they said anything? Do they even care? Are they listening to their constituents? I'm here to tell you that they are. It's just they're doing it under very different circumstances. So some things are still true even with all the change that's happened. And one of those is that, yes, members of Congress are absolutely paying attention to their constituents. The difference is they're not being as vocal with how they're feeling about things in terms of the proposed changes and cuts. It is absolutely true that congressional staff are not experts on all topics. And I will say that we should all kind of send some thoughts and prayers to congressional staff today. They are completely overwhelmed in this new environment, even the ones who've been around for a while, again, because of the volume of what's happening and the way things are changing. I have been on Capitol Hill pretty much every week since mid-February, and the one thing I hear in every single visit, regardless of whether I'm visiting the House or Senate, and whether I'm meeting with the chief of staff or a legislative correspondent, everybody has said the same thing, which is this administration is not even communicating with their allies and champions on Capitol Hill. The members of Congress and their staff are hearing about things and new policies the same way everybody else is, i.e. they read about it online or they hear about it on television. But there's almost no communication between the administration and Capitol Hill, and that's been frustrating for everybody. You can explain why an issue matters to people in their state or district, and that's the point. That's the take-home message I want for you today. I've already talked about how there's just a lot of new faces, and it can be difficult, but very rewarding to develop an individual relationship with your members of Congress and especially their staff. If you can get them to let you be a go-to expert that they can turn to when they have questions, that's terrific. And if you become their source of trustworthy and credible information, that relationship will pay off with a big return on investment over the long term. A couple other things to keep in mind. You need to be a constituent if you're going to reach out to your member of Congress or their staff. By being a constituent, I say you either live or work in their district. You don't necessarily have to vote in their district, although hopefully you do, but you have to have a connection. So if you live in New York and you have concerns about what's happening in Texas, Ted Cruz's office isn't going to listen because you're not a constituent. However, if you have a colleague or a collaborator in Texas who can reach out to Ted Cruz, you can use that effort. It takes a lot of time and effort to build relationships, especially right now. Things that used to be able to be accomplished in, 1 or 2 visits, it's now taking multiple phone calls and emails to achieve the same results. This third point is the most important one is, again, congressional staff are overwhelmed. So if you do not get a response to your email or your phone call or your outreach, don't be offended and don't think that you haven't been heard. Feel free to go back and recontact them and be patient and understand that it may take 3 or 4, even 5 emails to get a response. It is very hard to break through all of the noise right now on Capitol Hill. So the best way to make an impact is to come up with a very simple message and repeat it often. I recommend no more than 3 talking points. And then finally, make sure you're using the resources available to you. ASBMB has wonderful advocacy resources, and FASEB has as well, and we value our partnership with ASBMB. So know that you're not alone in the sense of, well, where can you get information? And then I will end with just what I hope is more of a cheerleading message. Advocacy does matter. We are starting to see that right now on Capitol Hill. So this is a messy slide, but that picture with the American flags, that is a committee meeting, I think it's Energy and Commerce Committee, of members of that committee holding up signs that say, "Don't cut Medicaid." Um, and then this is just sort of a series of things that I just quickly yesterday scanned some members of Congress's, Twitter feeds and websites, and you can see where they're starting to speak out and express concerns about what's happening. So we need to encourage that to happen, but we also need, I'm very aware that there's probably some grassroots fatigue right now because we've been at this for 100 days and it feels like we're not making an impact. And I'm here to tell you that we are starting to finally have an impact. That being said, we must raise the volume and we must raise the frequency of the contact in order to get through. So that's my sort of parting word for today. And then finally, in terms of staying informed, huge challenge with so much going on, but FASEB is trying to do our best to keep everybody abreast of what's happening through social media, because we know that's where people are going these days. And then we also have our Washington Update newsletter. So I will stop here because I'm definitely at my time limit.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. That was a fantastic presentation and really appreciate you ending on a positive note. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Kevin Gardner.
Thank you, Serena. Let me share screen and we will go from there. Of course, as I say that, the share screen bar is hiding off somewhere in the distance. Let's go grab that right here. There we go. Let's do that to, what's there to there. Okay, is that coming through properly?
Almost.
Almost. Talk to me.
It's just a black screen right now.
Ooh, that is definitely not coming through properly. Let's try that again.
Oh, okay. So we see your screen now.
Okay, I'm going to try doing slideshow one more time. Sorry, I apologize to all involved.
Okay, it's a black screen again, but let's give it a few minutes.
You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to try, we had this working before well. I'm going to try one other way. Let's see if this works any better.
Yes, we can see that.
Perfect. Thank you. And
You're
sorry
fine.
for the technical delays, everyone. Let me just change pointer over. Okay, to laser. Good. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Kevin Gardner. I am a member of ASBMB's Public Affairs Advisory Committee, or so-called PAC. And what I'd like to share a little bit is some of the experience that I've had in working with PAC in preparing for advocacy meetings such as you were just hearing previously. First, a little bit of why I do any of this. I am a tenure track professor of biochemistry. I've been doing this for 27 years. And that's been funded by the US taxpayers through grants at NIH and NSF. And so part of this is really to thank the taxpayers and the policymakers around that for supporting what I do. Number two is I tend to find for non-scientists, how we actually work in academic scientific research and education is kind of different than the stereotypical view over here on the right. I haven't worn a tie in the lab in quite some time. I don't use quite this much glassware in what looks like a patently unsafe arrangement, and well, the lab is in color and not in black and white. Helping fill in some of the details as to your tax dollars become this and this and this in my lab, in my classroom, and in broader ways, I think has really been appreciated by people in everywhere from sideline discussions at one of my kids' volleyball games to larger groups. And in related to this, I think really a big focus of ASBMB that I've enjoyed for advocacy has really been focusing on basic research, which I hope many of us on this call really recognize as the place that answers some very fundamental questions in the way the world works. That's important to share, and I think it's important to tie that into some very concrete and direct ways with personalized stories as you can of next generation of discoveries and discoverers that are happening in your laboratory around you, turning into jobs of people who support us in our universities and in research institutes, new cures and new breakthroughs that happen in other ways. And finally, I've been doing this individually for about 10 plus years for a variety of reasons at the state and national level. But I've been really proud to do this with ASBMB's PAC since 2023 and continuing forward as chair of the PAC starting this summer. So what ASBMB's been doing. Related to why I enjoy doing this, one of the reasons I enjoy working with ASBMB is a really good alignment of the organizational objectives here. Number one, we really want to communicate on what basic research is and why it's so important. I think everyone on the call can appreciate the new drug, the new therapy, the new idea that is being discussed out in the general press that the public's hearing about arose in many cases by basic research that happened 10, 15, 20 years earlier and not necessarily aligned with what the fundamental application would be. If we don't look broadly into the questions of the biological world now, those practical impacts oftentimes will not be happening years in the future. As we just heard from Jennifer, we've had 100 days plus of what I think we can all agree are some really fundamentally bad policy decisions, things that are appear to be capricious, impulsive, not informed by the community, have been adding up in multiple ways such that the engine that drives all this has really been put at risk. And finally, I think the tie into between the basic research element that happens in an individual's lab in a university is really tied in, maybe in ways that we need to remind ourselves sometimes, and definitely remind the general public of as having real concrete economic impact. Statistics show that every dollar spent by NIH, for example, turns into $2.60 of economic impact more broadly, turning into, for example, the person who might work at the company selling your lab various items, the person who might be providing deliveries or receiving in your at your university, and far, far beyond that. So with that, we are trying to get the word out, especially in the context of this discussion, to members of Congress and their staff on three fundamental policy or advocacy areas. Number one is what's going on in the current year, FY 2025. Number two, what needs to happen in FY 2026 to address some of the challenges that we've had actually for quite some period of time, but exacerbated in 25. And then talking more broadly about the state of science and how it's being impacted. In 25, our area is really, as Jennifer noted, to remind and empower Congress with their role with the power of the purse. They are the ones who set the budgets, tell the federal agencies how to proceed. We have substantive concerns that at NIH, at NSF, at DOE, and at other federal agencies, the agencies are not spending the funds that were appropriated by Congress to them with very clear real-world impact on all of us on this call and many of our colleagues. Number two, for FY 26, while we have been somewhat lucky, in my personal opinion, in FY 2025 to be operating under a CR, continuing resolution, that keeps the FY 24 numbers intact, this still represents some long-term losses in buying power for the different federal agencies in light of increased costs that we've seen across the board with inflation and other drivers. These are numbers that are being mentioned here: 51.3 billion for NIH, 9.9 billion at NSF, and 9.5 billion at DOE, Office of Research. We are really underscoring that these are different numbers than what might be seen, for example, in the president's skinny budget that Jennifer introduced. And we choose to say our baseline for this discussion is that we've been underfunding something that has tremendous impact. Who wouldn't want to give $1 into something that will generate $2.60 back? And not just economically, but with many other broader impacts in terms of trainees educated. That's our workforce for tomorrow. Discoveries being made, those are our new companies, and we want to see those all occur here in the United States. And finally, again, underscoring what Jennifer really nicely laid out, we've been through a chaotic 100+ days now with many of us being the proverbial tails on the ends of dogs that are getting whipped around as our really our partners in the staffs at NIH, at NSF, and elsewhere have had massive disruption to their workflow. And again, as with Jennifer, I've been doing my job for 27 years now, and I've never seen anything even vaguely resembling this, and many of them haven't as well. So they're just trying to stay in front of this. But unfortunately, communication from them as to what's going on inside the agencies getting over to the lawmakers has really been patchwork at best. As Serena noted, I was part of ASBMB's Hill Day visiting Capitol Hill last week. I heard repeatedly from staffers in offices, we want to support NIH, we want to support NSF, we want to support innovation and discovery and cures, but we don't get answers. Even for Republican offices that I was visiting, we don't get information as to what's happening. We need to hear about it. And in doing so, we'd like to advocate clearly to help pass the word along. So related to this, I think these are very direct outcomes of what our advocacy asks are. The proposed budgets for 26, which involve draconian cuts at NIH, approximately 40%, and at NSF, approximately 55%, would threaten a generation, and I don't feel like I'm being hyperbolic here, it threaten a generation of American science and scientists. This would involve massive cuts into, I think, not only new grants, but in existing ones in the research sphere and in the training area. And these cuts in the training programs, I think, sometimes fly a little bit under the radar. We want to talk about cures. We want to talk about the next big breakthrough. None of those happen without our trainees in our labs becoming that next generation of scientists. And these programs have really been hammered. I think I know most directly at NIH. I'll show a graph on that. And I'm seeing it very directly with support for students in my own lab. These are sending a very clear message to our undergraduate, graduate students, and postdocs. You need to be thinking about doing science elsewhere, not here in the United States, or you need to be thinking about some other kind of career path rather than helping be the person who will make that next big breakthrough here in the US. And finally, as I'm seeing this as someone who is involved in international partnerships of a variety of kinds, as the American scientific community is forced into a smaller, a more defensive position, as I think we would see if some of these cuts are enacted. This has multiple long-term knock-ons as to how the U.S. can lead in any kind of economic area, jobs created, discoveries made, companies formed, and I think with some long-term issues as to potential competitiveness or national security. So what can you do about this? ASBMB is really focusing on 3 different approaches. Letter writing campaign, get the word out very trivially, very easily to your elected officials. Sharing your story more directly in a variety of different mechanisms. And I think most relevantly to what Jennifer was noting at the end, getting word out to your elected officials by requesting local district meetings. That should be straightforward and give you a one-on-one or small group on one FaceTime with some of the people who can most directly provide that information to your members of Congress. So letter writing and impact campaigns, what are their impact? You can see releases from us, you can see releases from FASEB or other organizations. What's the impact of all these? Well, it's really important. Again, your voice as a constituent matters. So in these, you're going to be targeted to help get word out to your senators, your representatives in Congress taking advantage of the addresses that you provide as the places that you are living or working. Your voice as a constituent matters to these people. I've heard very directly from congressional staffers. They are reading every letter in this. They are overwhelmed. You may not get a response immediately. The response you get may feel generic, but it is making an impact. And our goal here is really to help, and Jennifer, thanks again for saying it. We need to amplify the volume here at this point in time, especially as the FY26 budgetary process is going on. We really need to overwhelm congressional offices with similar calls to action or messages. These offices, the staffers here, they're the same age as our graduate students. They're about comparably paid to many of our graduate students. It's not an easy job, and they have so many things that they need to be tracking and keeping on top of. But we've got to be one of those things that they need to be keeping on top of. We need to be one of those topics that they need to be talking to their staff and their team about. So please, hearing from constituents is an absolute priority to do in letter writing campaigns through ASBMB, FASEB, and others. Make that literally a 1-minute exercise. Share your story. There are a variety of mechanisms I think people can see. Social media, op-eds. There are a variety of people I think you can see over on Blue Sky, Twitter, or elsewhere. For example, reporters in various ways who are looking for that personal story and are more than glad to speak to you either on or off the record and through a variety of public or confidential mechanisms. ASBMB is a part of that. So there are a lot of things going on right now. It's becoming increasingly difficult for Congress to get all the information they need from the staff. Please take advantage of the ASBMB PAC and our outstanding staff who Serena leads, because we have relationships with congressional offices that, again, are telling us directly, we need more information from what's going on the ground. We can be a part of helping you get your word out. There's a link nicely at the bottom here that underscores how we can help do that. And we're more than glad to share information with people with names or without names as you prefer. And finally, you can request a local district meeting. Again, ASBMB has the resources available for you to be able to set these meetings up, to learn some general talking points and tips, and how you can get 1-page fact sheets available so that you can leave those behind, have a one-on-one meeting, and then for continuing impact, say, I'm leaving some information here that documents exactly what we're doing and why this is so important. Again, ASBMB facilitates this really nicely. We have a form available to make a constituent meeting request. A district staffer is going to respond. You need to be really clear as to why you're requesting this meeting, and you can set time, day, and place for this. When we're on Hill Day, it's usually a couple of us working together in each office. I strongly encourage that too. If you have another scientist or a representative from your university who wants to ride along with you, please go through and do that. And that can help, I think, give complementary views to what you might be expressing yourself. Do a little bit of work, practice what you want to talk about beforehand, and get those leave behinds printed out and nicely organized so it can be a straightforward thing for you to go through, explain who you are, what you're looking to do, what you're asking for, and why these are important, and then getting questions and feedback from them. A really great question I think we found in our most recent Hill Day: how can we help you? We are scientists who are the boots on the ground in different states, different kinds of agencies, different kinds of organizations. How can we help give you, members of Congress, what you need to be doing to advocate for biomedical research? And with this, our real point here that we want you to be thinking about is really have in your mind really a 3-component thing that you want to walk through with the staffer that you are going to be sitting with. Again, the time's going to be short here. Expect a 15, 20, maybe 30-minute meeting if things are good. And you really want to have this thought out a little bit beforehand with a hook. Introduce yourself, a line. Time short, you have one story or statistic that you can share, and most powerfully from a personal perspective of yours. And then the sinker is our request of those three items that I mentioned before. Get the FY25 funds properly spent. FY26 budget requests need to not be a skinny budget that has literally generational impact on biomedical research in the United States, but a more aspirational one that will fund this properly and address issues of lost buying power. And then three, sharing where we're at currently with the disruption we've had with the changes over the last 100 days. By way of introduction, for sample, here's a little bit of what I do. So my name is Kevin Gardner. I am a biochemist. I've been doing this for 27 years in a couple of universities, initially in Texas and now in the fine state of New York. And I run a research lab of approximately 10 PhD students, postdocs, and technicians. We're biochemists. We're interested in figuring out how cells sense and react to the world around them. A cell needs to know, does it have enough food or not? And make a decision, yes, or I have enough food, or no, I don't. The cell needs to react to that, move towards the food, for example, and tell the rest of the cell how to go do that. In our studies, we hope to get not only a basic understanding of biology, how those switches work, disease, what happens when they're broken, and maybe even, if we're lucky, some applications. How can you use those switches, or maybe even trigger some of them artificially at times of our choosing, which could lead into some great biotech tools and therapeutics. In my own lab, we've trained over the years about 70 students and postdocs over the time. We've been fortunate that a couple of these ideas have really caught fire, leading to a couple of companies even being developed in products. For example, in our work on oxygen sensing in human cells, that's turned into a targeted cancer therapeutic that is now a Merck product. Roughly about 10,000 people woke up today to take a pill of this and reset a switch in a way that we've figured out how one would want to do to fight certain cancers. So the kind of work I do has great basic science implications, but also leads to long-term workforce and economic development. What's my statistic? I am really deeply concerned by the disruption we've seen at NIH and NSF over the past several months. Personally, I started 2025 with 3 NIH grants that are funding aspects of my work. Actually, 4. 2 of them are being fused into a single new one. Was told right after Thanksgiving that was going to get funded. And we are now 6 months in of a grant stuck in administrative review for unclear reasons. An ongoing research grant, I found out literally on Tuesday, will be canceled. It will go through 1 year of a 5-year funded period, and we're not going to get renewed for year 2 and onwards. And then finally, a training grant for graduate students. Got a killer score, was told that we were likely to get funded, but not only did our grant not get funded, but the entire program's been canceled. And I show over here graphs that I think really nicely Jeremy Berg, former NIGMS director, has been making widely available to people over on Blue Sky. These are the graphs I had in mind to support some of those things. I don't show those in discussing with people, but this is what I'm thinking of. Practical impact is our research is slowed. I've got students knocking on my door wanting to join my lab to do PhDs. I'm sorry, I can't take any more in. We're full. And a general disruption with time needed for me a lot away from the research and training missions that are fundamentally at the heart of who I am and what I do on a day-to-day basis. And I know that this isn't just me. This is not just my lab, not just my department, not just my university. I'm hearing it from all over the place, from PIs, from students, from postdocs. And this is really negative in long-term aspects of convincing some really, really bright people don't go into science in the United States. What's our ask? Our ask are the 3 asks that I mentioned before. Gotta get the 25 funds spent. Got to get 26 appropriations handled appropriately. And we need to get the state of science back to something that looks a lot more like the normal that I think Jennifer and I, and many of you on the call, have been used to for years before. Because the scientific research enterprise is not like a light switch. We can't just turn it on, turn it off, and then turn it on again and immediately come up to speed. As people are lost, as projects are parked, restarting them is a long and arduous process. We do not need that to happen at a point where we're chasing down some of the most important problems in biology. A couple of meeting tips that I've learned really well through ASBMB and experience more broadly. Some no-nos: do not talk about elections or contributions in a legislative meeting. This is solely to educate and discuss with staffers the issues that we have over in science that we've been discussing. Please stay on message. Time is limited. And confirm that time as you sit down to start the meeting off. Again, 15 to 30 minutes is likely what you'll be working with. Please be flexible, respectful, patient, and polite. I've felt like I've been treated respectfully and patiently, even by individuals who don't share the same priorities I do over in research. It's good to have at least understanding as to where each other are in these conversations. A topic that we are getting underscored with at ASBMB is really stay within your lane. There are some topics over in biomedical research that I think many of us on the call here can appreciate or have extremely charged implications surrounding them. And if these are not the areas that you have very direct day-to-day experience in, it's wisest to just say, that's a topic that I'd prefer to get back to you on later and confer with ASBMB. We have resources in our organization and in other professional societies that can offer a very clear, well-informed, and direct answer to where things could go from there. And finally, be polite. Send a thank you and follow-up note afterwards. That helps keep active lines of communication open that will be useful as we go forward in the future. And finally, just to note, to underscore, as I think you've seen along the way here, there are lots of member resources that ASBMB and FASEB and other agencies provide. Please take a look at our website as to information as to what we're doing within ASBMB, both as the PAC and more broadly as the organization as a whole. And this does include resources and fact sheets that are exactly the kind of thing to help you prepare for some of these visits and provide some leave behinds, explaining what ASBMB's priorities are and how those can be acted on most directly going forward. With that, I apologize. I've gone a couple minutes over time. Let me turn the floor back over to Serena for Q&A.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Appreciate it. And Jennifer, both your presentations were very informative and helpful. I hope all of our attendees will take away that you can really make a difference. You can reach out to your elected officials. You are their constituents, and that's how we can really start making a change and an impact. So for our last remaining 10 minutes or so, we would love to open this up to Q&A from the audience. Please feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A chat. I know it might take you a few seconds, so I'm happy to get us started. So Jennifer, I know you've been in DC for a while. You are a policy pro, public affairs expert. Can you kind of paint a picture of what a successful congressional meeting looks like?
Yes, even under the new circumstances, I think the first thing is a deep connection with the person that you're meeting with. So does the meeting start off warm and friendly? Is it, you exchange pleasantries, talk a little bit about why you're there. I will say I've had some great meetings where the aide has said up front, look, I'm really happy you took the time to come in here and explain to me why what's happening to biomedical research is so troubling, and why it's important that we take action. And thank you for being here. So if you start off with a meeting where the aide thanks you for coming in, that's a great place. The second is when you make the eye contact and you can see that they are clearly listening to you. I always think it's great when they stop you and say, hold on, wait, I have a question, and ask that question. If they don't do it in the middle of your talking points, it is very important once you get through them, stop and take a breath and let them absorb what you've just said. Don't feel the need to keep talking. You can, but give them a minute to sort of hear what you've said and process, and then you can say, so just went through a lot of information. What questions can I answer for you? So it's always a great sign when I see the aide making eye contact, taking notes, and then saying, okay, actually do have a couple questions, or could you clarify what you just said? Or I'm still very confused about that last point you made. So that's another thing too. I think it's always great when the aide seems to want to continue the conversation, past maybe the allocated 15 or 20 minutes. And if you have that time, run with it. Use that time, right? But don't be offended if they say, "I'm really sorry, I have to cut this off." That is a great time to say, "I've appreciated your time. Would it be okay if I scheduled a follow-up with you, either virtually or, do you have time for a Google Meet or anything like that?" And leave that out there. And I think the other thing too is when you leave the conversation with them, if they give you your contact information directly, or their contact information directly, that's always great. If they don't, make sure you ask for it. And they will not be offended at all if you do. So I think those are the kind of the big things. And I always think it's a great sign if you have a meeting with an aide, for example, whether it's virtually or in person, and you send a thank you follow-up email and they write back to you and they say, "Received and acknowledged," or "I enjoyed it as well," or "Keep in touch," that is an open invitation for you to continue building that relationship. And there is a fine line between being helpful and being a pest. And people always ask me, "Well, how do I know when I've crossed that line?" Well, first of all, I'll tell you. But more importantly, I think, you want to be there and be helpful for them. So I think one of the most extraordinary things I've seen in the last couple of months is when NIH dropped that bombshell announcement about the 15% cap on facilities and administrative costs. Every meeting I've had since then, the aides have said, "Okay, can you explain this to us? Because we really don't understand what F&A costs are. We've got the talking points from HHS, but what's really happening?" And when you talk to them and you explain what F&A costs are, they start listening. "Oh, okay, that makes sense. You're right. We would not want to be doing research in a lab where we don't have some sort of chemical safety protocol. That makes a ton of sense. And yeah, we understand why you can't do research in the dark, kind of things." So being able to kind of get into some of these nerdy issues, I think has been, one of the opportunities of the last couple months.
Love that you highlighted some of those opportunities. Thank you. Kevin, is there anything you want to add?
I really thought that was fantastic, Jennifer. What she said.
Perfect.
I will say too, one thing is, if again, it might take you a while to really get that connection with someone, and not all congressional staff are the same.
Mhm.
Some of them, you really walk away and you're like, "Well, that's 15 minutes of my life I'm not going to get back." What I would say is kind of keep plugging away. There's tremendous turnover in congressional staff. So that person that you met with 2 months ago who did not appear to be alive during your conversation might be gone and might have been replaced with someone who's like, "I love talking to researchers."
And even if you don't feel like it was a successful meeting, remember that your talking points, your asks, because you're a constituent, it's still going to get up to the boss. So even though you might be going in with an ask of somebody, to an office who is proposing major cuts, they still have to mark it down. You're still a constituent. They are going to be responsive, even if it might not feel like that in the moment. So we have a question about somebody who is planning to bring a group of graduate students to a congressman's office in their district, which we love that. Thank you for taking the time to make that plan. The question is, do we have an advantage cutting through the noise as a group of graduate students? Should I emphasize that as a part of our hook?
Yeah, I mean, feel free to disagree with me, but I hate to say it, but I love to use graduate students as bait because they're not that investigators aren't important in terms of the more advanced. But most congressional staff are fairly young, so when they look
Mhm.
into the eyes of a PhD student or a postdoc, they kind of see themselves. And so I do think it's important to sort of bring them. The other thing too is I love watching graduate students in congressional meetings because they kind of approach it like a lab, conversation or a group project. They work together. The
Mhm.
conversation flows naturally off of each other, and watching that interaction is I think, very helpful. And it also communicates to the aide the team nature of science. No scientist works in isolation. And so that's also, I think, a great thing to put forward.
Absolutely, Kevin.
Yeah, here. I love this idea for exactly the reasons that Jennifer stated. You will very likely be peers of the staffers you're meeting with. The joint interaction, I think, gives multiple perspectives. I mean, I always like when at ASBMB we approach offices as pairs of people, sometimes as trios. I think if you're looking for the staffer to develop that kind of connection that Jennifer mentioned, the good eye contact, the enthusiastic response, sometimes maybe it isn't one person's story, but it's the person sitting next to you that can provide that hook. I think the grad students are also, to be blunt, I think the current day and age is wickedly unpleasant for all of us who are getting whiplashed around in the biomedical research community, but I think it really comes home to a lot of the grad students. I just had a conversation yesterday with a talented student who really wants to join my lab as a PhD. Until NIH gives us clarity of the kind we've been used to in the past. I mean, I hate to sound rigid in my ways, but boy, when I'm thinking about funding and about PhD students and things, this is not a today or tomorrow thing. This is what's going on over the next 5 years thing. And this disruption has been really, just eaten at the heart of that in a very fundamental way. I think the students who see this with their own eyes can maybe convey that story in a way that the staffers can understand most effectively. I love the idea.
And I'll also add that congressional staffers like meeting young scientists because you are the scientists of the future. And they know that, and they know that that holds extra weight. Not that our PIs and established scientists aren't doing fantastic work, they are, but there is that extra pull there.
Yeah.
The same person kind of added, if we should only be expecting a 15 to 30-minute meeting, should we abandon the idea of giving the congressman a tour of our labs for the sake of fitting time? Should we just sit around a table instead?
Well, a couple things on that. I'm happy to jump in. First of all, you should always invite the member of Congress to visit your lab, but definitely don't try and accomplish that in a 30-minute meeting. That's a bad idea. I think, it's a great thing, way I like to end meetings once we've had a great conversation and talked about the issues, to say, we would really love to get the congressman or the chief of staff out to visit our research lab. Is there someone in your office that I can talk to at least issue the invitation and begin the conversation? And most of the time they say, oh, well, you got to talk to the scheduler, and that gives you an opportunity to say, well, can I get the scheduler's contact information? One note of caution for all of you here, because otherwise the institutional federal affairs people will be after me. You should never invite a member of Congress to visit your lab entirely on your own. You need to work through established protocols and processes at your institution. And if you are not sure what those are, please ask. This is not a situation where you want to just act, act now and beg for forgiveness later. The other thing too is the federal affairs teams at your institution may have already issued an invitation and been working on this. And now you can identify yourself and saying, I'd love to be part of the planning of this activity. So yeah, definitely don't try and do something in 30 minutes to show them a research lab, but you could use that conversation to say, we've got some really exciting research funded by NIH here. We would love to get you or the staff person out. Obviously, the big trophy is getting the member of Congress there, but I've seen some incredibly effective meetings when you invite their staff, because quite frankly, their staff are the ones who are probably helping to make the big decisions about how that member of Congress is going to vote. And they can say, I saw firsthand what's happening at the University of Nebraska, kind of thing. The member of Congress is going to be there for a reason, and you might not always have their full attention.
Serena, I know time's running short, but I really want to highlight Grace Bennett has put a couple of questions into the chat itself. We have recently met our representative, Georgia 1, Buddy Carter. We have met with him and done these things, but his responses in the meeting do not reflect his actions. What are your suggestions to go forward? And she's got a follow-up. Can we invite ASBMB reps to our university to do talks like this?
Thank you. So yes, and I provided that person my contact information. So thank you very much. His responses in the meeting do not reflect his actions. That's okay. It does happen. You just have to keep making the asks, because at the end of the day, he does know that these key agencies are bringing money into his district. They are supporting his economy. They're supporting his constituents. So even if it's not reflective in the action, that's when repetition is key. You need to keep making that message over and over again. And that's where having the buddy system really helps, because maybe you're making that ask with a colleague. Maybe you want that colleague to bring somebody else to keep moving that work forward. That really makes a big difference. I'm going to turn it over to Kevin and Jennifer to add anything to my response and for your closing remarks.
I'll just keep it simple and say that means have more meetings and bring more people into the conversation. So if you've got a SBIR or STTR grant or a small business or a biotech company that's also impacted by this, that next meeting should include graduate students and someone from the biotech company to explain to Mr. Carter that, this has downstream effects.
From my standpoint, I love all this. I think it is really important to get word out as to what biomedical research is, what our university setup is, and how that interfaces with the broader world around us. That we're operating on, as we've all heard over the last little bit, this is an 80-year deal, right, between the federal government and the universities. And it's produced some outstanding scientists, some outstanding discoveries, and outstanding innovations in a wide variety of ways. And I don't think that's entirely understood. If you're not in the system, I don't know how well that's understood and appreciated. So we're the experts. Please get the word out on it.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much for taking the time to talk to our members today. I hope all of our members are ready to be science advocates and, talk about your experiences, support the research enterprise, support scientists. If you ever have any questions, you're always welcome to reach out to publicaffairs@asbmb.org. This is what we're here for. Our organization, like FASEB, like other scientific societies, know that we're always advocating on your behalf in Capitol Hill in DC, and we hope that you'll do the same things in your own institutions. Thank you both and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Serena. Thank you all.
Thank you.